Hello everybody and welcome. Today we want to talk about a topic that's going to dominate the world in the future as it has in the past, and that's schooling, it's education. In particular, we're going to be talking about the common school, which has its origins 400 years ago. Long time. Why did we have schools? What's the reason that we wanted to have schools? It started back in the day with the intent that if you could train your students, your young people, on the nature and the culture of your community, then you have a better chance of not only inoculating them on how best to work in the environment, but also to protect and provide for themselves. Interesting philosophy. Still holds true today. But back in the day, when school started, it was really more physically oriented. How to hunt, how to fish, what you had to eat, and also how to communicate with other people. You certainly learned from your family, but you wanted families to talk amongst other people as well. Part of that had to do with the nature of having to survive. You had to at least create some kind of community so that as a whole you could all work together and survive in an often contentious and very difficult world. It's one of the reasons why we created these communities, small cities in a way, because you needed numbers. When you were hunting and farming, you often needed to work collaboratively because you couldn't create enough food. Or if one person had a down harvest or a down part of the city, somebody else was creating a different food that you could eat if your crops didn't work well. That was many, many years ago, many centuries ago. But as cities became bigger, as they became more, they understood the need to be more collaborative and the sharing nature of not just food, but also security, businesses came up, mercantile stores back in the day. And so these stores, one of the impacts and effects of these stores was to create a common repository in the town where people can go and get food stacks. There was also things like bars and saloons, not just the western area, but people that could go to congregate, who can interact. Churches became important during this era, as they still are in many parts of the countries today. But there needed to be a more formal aspect for people to be trained into the culture of the day, but also to learn some skills so that they can participate, so they can be a participating member of society. You may have heard my thoughts. There's really two aspects that education was created for, and that was first and foremost so that you would participate, learn the basic skills so that you can participate. But more importantly, and a more enlightened view of education is that you could contribute, not just participate, contribute your unique skills that would benefit your community, whether it's not just your family or friends, but also the people who would live in your immediate vicinity. And so we not just want to participate, we also want to contribute our unique skills to add to the reservoir of talents and knowledges that exist in our area. And so in order to do that, to not just allow people to participate or require them to participate, but also to not just require, but hopefully people would want to contribute their unique skills. We created these common schools. And we're talking in the 1600s. And later they were promoted by people like Benjamin Franklin and later Thomas Jefferson in the same era. But the thought is that they're very valuable, they should be universal, and we do rely on this sense of individualism and independence, but also an understanding that there needs to be some commonality. So these schools were started, and the first one was in Massachusetts, in the area of the New Englands, and it should be free, open to all, and foster a sense of morality, which was very important in the origin of schools, but also this concept of teachers, and teachers should be prepared and temperamentally suited. And by 1840, 55% of children attended some type of primary school. It's not what we think of today In fact, school was really weeks-based, not necessarily years-based. So it was much less. Part of that was that over 90% of the population was involved in farming, and the farmer and his family were required to be the primary workers for whatever plot of land they either farmed or owned. So males especially would not be going to school for years. In fact, it would be more in weeks-based. And we wanted to provide not necessarily just the rudimentary literacy skills, but skills beyond that. But not just how to read, but also what to do with what you've read. The reading requirements were very low. In fact, most people really couldn't read back in 400 years ago. But the thought was that they need to have some reading. If you want to create, especially as we move into the founding of the United States, there was a belief in the Federalist Papers, which was written by John Jay and I think Alexander Hamilton was the other. Don't hold me to that one. But when they wrote these Federalist Papers, which was an intent to get people to be supportive of this new government, which is eventually called the United States, the thought is that you had to have this educated citizenry, that democracy, which means people voting for something that's in their interest, isn't going to work unless people understand how life works and how the philosophies of life are going to influence politics. So they needed to have some education. There was this reliance that education works best and can be successful if you have this educated citizenry. As an aside, by the way, we often think we have a democracy in the United States. We actually don't. We have what's called a representative democracy. We don't vote, for the most part, on rules and laws. Instead, we elect people who then go and vote for the rules and laws. They're supposed to represent those that sent them either to California or New York or whatever the state capitals are. So they go to the state capital to vote on laws that impact and that benefit those that selected them and voted them into these offices, or in the case of Congress, you have people from Oregon and Washington who go to Washington, D.C., and the intent is they vote on behalf of the people they represent. We created this representative democracy because the founders at the time felt that the ordinary person wouldn't be able to control their emotions, and therefore they would be, in some ways, bound by the passions of the day. So they thought that if they had individuals who were smarter, more educated, that went to Washington or state capitals to vote, that they would have better laws. So in some ways, the common people elect the uncommon people to represent them, people who are smarter, brighter, more educated. That was, again, the thought 300 years ago, 200 and something years ago. Certainly doesn't hold today. We certainly want people who are more representative of the people that they represent, but also most of the citizenry have a degree of education that works well. It works well for a number of people. So therein lies a background of not just our democracy, but also of schools, to provide some level of reading and writing and some basic math so that people in this era, and we're talking in the 1600s, people in this era would be able to participate more in the running of that society. Common schools actually ended around 1900, but the thought was that this is the first time, at least in the pre-and in the United States, once it was founded, to say that we need to collaboratively work towards some type of commonality in the way that we produce education. We shouldn't have individuals who are learning basic skills differently in Philadelphia than they do in New York. Instead, we should have some type of curriculum that people agree with, that they can promote throughout this area that we inhabit, so that when a person in one state converses with a person in another, that they have this commonality. And though the common schools didn't exist much past the 1900s, the forethought of why we have a common school certainly exists today. And there's many aspects that came out of the common schools where if they would have had this structure back when they were created, it may have been more successful today. But we did structuralize, there's put into account some of these rules, regulations, processes, procedures that should be a component of the common school. And because of that today, there's many aspects of the common school that exist, free for all, open to all. Has a sense of morality. We do try to teach right and wrong in schools. And then this basic mentality that a person should have that is educated, to be able to have reason, to make a decision, to think for themselves, all really at their forefront, concerned with creating and encouraging a person to take care of themselves in the future, and also, and that's the participative aspect, but also to contribute their unique skills as well, which is much more the philosophical aspect. Good discussion on somewhat of a background on education in the common schools. Certainly look forward to our continued discussion on an important subject that dominates our world even today. Take care, everybody.